Hey, what's up, everyone? I was just thinking a little bit about the common denominator amongst this, like this sort of movement that we would like to create, that we are creating, that's already happening in the world. The main focus is, of course, on unconditional love and through nonviolence, and so nonviolence becomes like the common denominator, like the the thread that kind of unites, that identifies it. So pacifism becomes kind of like the trigger word for this sort of movement. And I think it's super important to create community around people with similar beliefs. So pacifists, we must unite. We must come together. We must share. We must come together physically, on the internet, however it is. But creating communities, whether they be virtual or real, physical, is important because there's strength in unity. And it's not that people who aren't pacifists are excluded, of course not. But the new covenant is all about that. It's taking that jump into pacifism, into nonviolence, into unconditionality. It's taking that jump into that realm, into that dimension. It's kind of like, that's kind of like the cliff we've all jumped off of. That doesn't mean we're necessarily gonna be pacifists all the time, but we know now, our consciousness knows. We know the true path. We know that we're gonna have to walk through that path. Whether we're there yet or not, we know that that's the path that we're gonna have to travel. And so we're preparing for that, where our consciousness is always gearing towards that. It's preparing. So that one little thought I had in my mind right now, so yeah, we must, and there's not many. It's hard to understand why there's not many pacifists nowadays. It seems like we have reached a level of understanding of many things. I think there's already an understanding in the world that racism is kind of, it doesn't really exist. Like different races don't even, it's not something real. It's just a creation, a divisionary creation. I mean, we're all part of the same race. It just seems like we've evolved enough to know that. Now, whether some people are still racist or not, but deep down they kind of already know that, I think. So that's a big step forward in the last, 100 years maybe, for people to kind of finally realize, you know what, we're all kind of the same. There's no one really superior to others. Now, people still feel different about culture. And that's what we mainly talk about now, is cultural differences, not racial differences. Even though African Americans have their own culture, certain segments of white America have their culture. Latins living in the U.S., Mexicans living in the U.S. have their own culture, etc. So it's more of a cultural clash than a racial clash. And cultural clashes are, I mean, it's the same ridiculousness as racial clashes. So why should there be clashes? Why are we bothered when so for example, here in Arizona, there's a lot of Mexicans coming in. I mean, a lot of Mexicans live here. I don't know, maybe 500,000 or something. I don't know the exact number, but there's a lot of labor, a lot of cheap labor, a lot of illegals and non-illegals that have crossed the border legally or illegally, whatever, and they're here and they live here. And they're either first generation or second generation Mexican. And there's a big, there's a lot of, I think it's mostly has to do with like classism, and because society looks still the main, we all look up to people with money. Not we, but like the culture. The culture, that's the philosophy of the culture, is that people with a lot of money are respected and admired, and that's the way it is. So the very rich are like that, unless they did something very wrong. But if they haven't, they're looked up upon. And so the opposite happens with people who have no money. And people who cross the border and are looking for opportunities usually are at the bottom of the barrel from Mexico, because they're people who have not found any opportunities in Mexico. They're unemployed, they're hungry, they're seeking opportunities. And they're usually the bottom of their barrel. They're usually uneducated. But they're looking to work. I mean, they're coming to work. And just to better their lives for their children, for themselves. So what was I getting at? That why is there a cultural clash? It's hard to understand. People just resent people who are different, I guess. It's hard for me to understand because I always lived in different cultures growing up. Chile in the United States, and every year we'd move from one country to the other, and so I was always kind of the outsider, and so I never really demanded, or I never really felt identified with one particular group, and so I couldn't feel, I think a strong identity with a certain group can lead to that clash with another group that has a very strong identity as well. But in the end, it's ridiculous, but I think we're getting better. We have to improve a lot. A lot of it has to do with entitlements nowadays. The more affluent nations get, it seems like they're more and more, they feel more and more entitled to things. They feel like they are owed things, in a sense, or somehow they've earned a certain rank or a certain title in society, which gives them rights within society, and that can be a very dangerous attitude. Why? Because you feel like you have the right to many things. Let's say you have a lot of money. you might feel like you have too many rights, like everyone has to treat you a certain way. Everyone has to kind of bow down to your to your ways, kind of deal. I don't know how to explain it very well, but it's just an entitled population. It's a population that is always fighting with each other because everyone feels like they're in the right and that other people should respect them, and if they don't, if they fall out of line with what they want or they like, then they automatically have a negative feeling towards that other person, and so that creates division. And so that's what we see a lot: entitlements and a lot of division, a lot of isolation of people. Not enough community, not enough interaction, not enough strong bonds. And but it's just part of growth, It's part of growth in cultures. In the book, The Choice to Love, that I wrote, there's a segment that says that our only human right is the right to choose to love, which is the only right that we'll need to be fulfilled anyway. So all these other rights that we think we have either from our Constitution or from our just the way we were raised and what you feel like you're entitled to, it's not. They're all external things that you feel are owed to you, and when you don't get it, then you feel bad, or something negative happens. So entitlements can be dangerous. Stay away from entitlements. You're not entitled to anything. God doesn't entitle you to anything. You don't really have the right to anything on this earth. But what you do have the right to do is to have love in your heart, to have peace in your heart. You have the right to be what you want to be inside, internally. You have the right to do that. And no one can take that away from you. No one can ever take that away from you. That is your innate right. That's what God has given you. And that alone can fulfill you. That alone can fulfill you. And when you start using all these other things to try to fulfill yourself, then you start getting into trouble, because you start creating all of these illusions of fulfillment that eventually crumble. And so entitlements is all part of that. When you feel entitled, we can see it with kings and queens, and everyone's supposed to be bowing to them, and stuff like that. And it's just a false world. It's not real, and it's detrimental to your development. And so I think last video we spoke of, you are enough, you are sufficient. You don't have to always be trying hard to meet the expectations of others, and even your own expectations. Like, you alone are sufficient. But on the other hand, there's the entitlement trap, which is you think too much of yourself and you expect others to bow down to you. And that's where we fall in a big trap of the ego. And that, everyone owes you something. And if they don't, give you what you want or what you expect, you get angry, you get, all these negative things come about internally. So just remember, you have a divine gift. You have a right. You have a divine right. And that is our right to choose. We can always choose, and we can always choose to love. And that's all we need. That's all we need is love. But anyway, that's my 2 cents for tonight. Pacifists Unite. And entitlements. It's Friday night, and the weekend is here. Hope you all have a good one. See you later.